All right, I'll come out and say it. I kind of like this phone. Now, does that mean that I think the price is good or that it's the right phone for everyone? No, of course not. But I do think that the iPhone 16e is a very solid device for those who decide that it's the right one for them. So let's go through everything that I liked and disliked over the last week of use, and hopefully this will help those who are watching and are interested in maybe buying the iPhone 16e if it's the right device for them. Now, for starters, I absolutely love the design here because of the back. It's just so clean and minimal, and it's mostly due to the fact that there's just one tiny little lens here. It's just smaller than what we're used to, and it gives off a little bit of a cleaner look. There are only two colors, black and white, which is kind of boring, but I'm actually really digging this matte black here. Couple the back with the black aluminum frames, and I really dig it. Did I also mention that this thing is just super light in the hand? Now, that feeling is probably just because I'm used to holding my iPhone 16 Pro Max all of the time, but that's one of the first things I noticed was, wow, this thing is incredibly light. Now, if you flip it over, the next jarring thing is the realization of how big these bezels used to be on the front of a phone. I guess the reduction in bezels from the iPhone 14 to the current 16 lineup was actually more drastic than I thought. I never really noticed it until I picked it up and looked at it. Otherwise, you do get a really nice 6.1-inch OLED display that's very bright, vibrant, and of course, it's just like what you're used to with an iPhone, except for the fact that there's no 120 Hz ProMotion, which is something that I'm used to, and I no longer have on here. And so that's one of the things that I kind of dislike. But again, if you never had it, you obviously don't know what you're missing. Aside from that, there's also no dynamic island, but instead we have the notch with support for Face ID. And while I don't really miss the dynamic island that much, I do miss it for live activities, like quickly glancing at the score of a Cavs game, or if I need flight information, that is super helpful. Otherwise, I can kind of take it or leave it here. The same sort of applies to always on display, though I think that I would miss always on more so than dynamic island. But again, if you've never had any of these features and you're upgrading from something older, you're going to love having Face ID, and you're not really going to know that you're missing out on some of those other features that I just mentioned, and you might not even care about having them. Now, even though you don't have some of those newer features that have happened over the last couple of years, you do get one newer feature that's come out, and that's the action button over the old mute switch that we had before. This allows for custom functions to be mapped to this button, aside from just switching it from like ringer to silent. You can launch your flashlight, camera, some things that you have in Control Center, and for the first time from a phone that doesn't have camera control, you have visual intelligence being able to be mapped to this button here. And finally, the last thing I want to point out is that you do, on the bottom here, get USB-C for charging, and it supports 20-watt fast charging, but the biggest charging bummer here is the lack of MagSafe and Qi 2. It would be nice to have the MagSafe ecosystem available for all the new iPhones and faster charging available through that feature, but instead we're just left with the slower standard Qi charging that we've had before we had MagSafe and Qi 2. And so it's pretty slow for 2025 standards. You can technically get some third-party cases that will at least help you take better advantage of the MagSafe, magnetic accessories, but I really do miss just not having it built into the device itself. Now, for those who don't know what MagSafe is or never had it, this is kind of like the other things. It's kind of a non-issue because you didn't have Dynamic Island or Always on Display, and then you can just add MagSafe to that list. You really don't know what you're missing, but it is something that I wish you could experience because I really like it. What about living life with one single camera? How has that been? Honestly, I think I could do this more so than I thought I could. I had this delivered to me on vacation, which is why you saw my daughter unboxing it for me in a short. So I took a lot of pictures there to test out the camera, and most scenarios that required either an ultra-wide lens or a telephoto lens just kind of had to do with my inability to move easily throughout the crowd. So, I was missing it a little bit then on those few occasions, but I couldn't step back because there were a lot of people, or I couldn't move forward because there were a lot of people. But other than that, I think having the 2x crop has been okay. The main sensor, that 48 megapixel main camera, has been very good. So there was those rare, frustrating times, but a majority of the time, I could easily take photos with the main 1x sensor or the 2x crop, and photos turned out looking pretty familiar to me. They look pretty much like what I have on my other iPhone 16 devices. I didn't really notice that much of a difference here. I would love to hear from you in the comments down below what you think of the pictures that you just saw, and whether or not you think you can actually live with having one lens. I think I could do it, but I would miss my telephoto lens more so than the ultra-wide. Lastly, from an internal hardware perspective, there are two things that I do want to briefly highlight. Number one is that this phone comes with a slightly binned down A18 chip. Now, for the normal people out there, and I'm putting myself in there as well, I wouldn't notice any difference between the A18 that's not binned down or the one that you have on this phone. I think performance has been great. You still get all of the Apple Intelligence features. I had no lag or hiccups when doing all of those things. I can play games with hardware accelerated ray tracing on this phone. Everything has been perfectly fine. The 16E has very good performance. Nothing to worry about there. Now, the other new aspect here is Apple's first ever 5G modem called the C1 chip. Now, it's only been a week, and this is something that's really hard to talk about with absolute certainty because I don't know that I can make judgments quite yet on the cellular connection, but what I have noticed is that Disney World, which is a very busy park, and usually I run into some clogged networks, I ran some speed tests and the results were both mixed. Shout out to Verizon, by the way. They activated this phone for me and gave me a line so that I can test it because I am a Verizon customer on my personal phone, which is an iPhone 16 Pro Max, and that's running the Qualcomm chip that we've been using for quite a bit now. And so this is using the C1, obviously, but it's on the same network. And so again, speeds were hit and miss. Sometimes the C1 was doing better, and sometimes the 16 Pro Max was doing better, and sometimes they were just kind of the same. Now, with dead zones and kind of consistency, that is where I would notice a little bit of a difference in favor of the new C1 chip. I thought performance and stability of the connection was just kind of overall more consistent. There's one spot at my house that when I got home, I wanted to test. In particular, it's my master bedroom bathroom. Don't judge me. We all do it. But this is a notorious dead zone in my house for cell service. And I don't know if it's like a placebo effect or what, but this was actually working a lot better than my 16 Pro Max when it comes to that very specific area that would have a dead zone and things would just not be able to load on social media. Battery life is absolutely fantastic though, and that's something that Apple is advertising with the C1 chip. Hopefully that stability with the connection, you're not always searching for, a better cell signal, which does drain battery. That's where Apple is planning to get really good battery life. But also, is it just the fact that this phone doesn't usually use up a lot of power compared to my Pro Max? It's not using up the same type of display that's more powerful on that phone. So is the battery gains coming from that, or is it coming from the C1 chip? It's really hard to tell. So yeah, overall, I really do like this phone. And if you're someone coming from an iPhone 11 or older, even a 12, I think you'll enjoy some of these upgrades that the iPhone 16e has to offer. The price should have been $499, and I'm going to die on that hill, but something tells me I'm not alone and that most of you would agree. But of course, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Now, I know a lot of you are going to be mad about that price, but if you have anything else to say, I would love to hear it down in those comments. This has been Dan with MacRumors. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you around in the next video.